Why don't I start with a few bits of welcoming news, I guess, and then I can hand over to Nick a little bit later on. So I guess the first thing to say is hello, good afternoon, and welcome to those joining us. Welcome to the February 2025 edition of the Turing's Clinical AI Interest Group meeting. So my name's Joe Alderman. I'm an anaesthetist and intensivist based in Birmingham, and along with my colleagues Emma, Nick, and Alicia, we co-organise this weekly or this monthly webinar series. I can see a lot of familiar faces online, so welcome back and thanks again for joining us. But for those of us that perhaps are joining for the first time this month, this group has three main aims. So we are aiming to enable sharing, so allowing clinicians and scientists to share expertise in the design and methodology of clinical AI. Pooling, to build a community of people with shared interests to facilitate communication around clinical AI, really. And also educating, so building materials and facilitating training for healthcare professionals, particularly those that are maybe naive to AI and data science, to learn about how these might have applicability to their roles in healthcare. And in these monthly meetings, we invite international experts from around the world to speak about their areas of specialist interest in the work they do. And we also give a platform to you, our members, to give brief intros to tell us about what you're up to and also let us know about how the wider group can help. So I think I've done enough time filling, and that's probably enough for me anyway. So Nick, I'm going to hand over to you for a bit of a rundown of the latest news. Nick.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Joe. Well, it's been a really exciting month for the Clinical AI Interest Group, not least because we have some award winners within our midst. So the 2025 AI Visionaries Recognition Award went to the AI for Women's Health Group. So that includes Bianca Shaw, Kristen Cowlow, Annalisa Occhipinti, and our very own Emma Caroon. So virtual rounds of applause round the screen for those. I mean, it's an amazing thing. And just a shout out for the Women's Health AI Interest Group. Lots of things going on. Just to say that next month, so on the 4th of March, on International Women's Day, they're going to be joined by a panel of AI visionaries. And there are links to that in our newsletter. And also on the 5th of June, in Cambridge, they're going to be hosting their very own conference called AI in Women's Health, Bridging Research and Patient Voices. That's going to be a hybrid event, but if you do want to go along in person, then sign up to the registration. And again, there's a link in our interest group newsletter. Also, as you will know, we love a debate. We've had some brilliant ones over the years. Explainability in late 2023, and then computer vision versus large language models in 2024. The Public Health AI Interest Group are hosting a debate on the 11th of March. This is going to be virtual, and the topic is the motion is, can AI's energy demands ever align with public health goals? And they have Professor Hugh Montgomery and Gabrielle Samuel, both from Hugh from UCL and Gabrielle from KCL, arguing, I think, for and against the motion. But I may have got that wrong. If I have done, I apologize. And there's a link to that in the chat. Brilliant. So huge amounts going on. Joe will also mention our next Clinical AI Interest Group meeting, which is going to be next month. But we'll do that at the very end so as not to overload you. But I'm now going to hand over to Emma, who's got a 3-minute introduction for us.
Hello, thank you very much. I just want to highlight we weren't the only winners of the AI Visionaries. There was quite a lot of them. So we were in a group of amazing people. So that was really great. And thanks for highlighting that. It's lovely. So our 3-minute intro, I can see him here, is Aaron. Do you want to unmute yourself and start your 3-minute intro? I will time you.
Thank you. I'm in the bus. I do apologize for the background noise, but hi everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today, and thank you, Dr. Emma, for the opportunity. So my name is Aaron. I currently work in GP practice as a PCN clinical pharmacist, and my interest in technology started from 2016 when I explored metaverse, blockchain, AI, and now quantum. I'm also an NHS clinical entrepreneur, and I guess my ask is for this community is keep going the conversation, because I'm learning so much from the Slack communication. Also, for those that are available, there is a clinical AI quantum hackathon. So they held the first one on the 1st and 2nd of February, and it was a huge success. And basically, we're using a platform called Lovable, which allow you to create a fully working web application, which is prompt. And we have cash prize. We have Raspberry Pi to sponsor us with a starter kit. Also, 11 Labs with free API. And the winners of the team were using multiple API, for example, 11 Lab for voice, ChatGPT for medical advice, as offered with fake patient, of course. And the next one is on the 2nd and 8th of March in London. And if anyone's interested, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, Aaron Adressa, and with Dr. Emma permission. Can I share the link of the hackathon on the chat? Thank you.
Yes,
How long do I have
please.
left?
Oh, 2 more minutes, I reckon.
I got 2 more minutes. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm also passionate about social prescribing. So T-STEM for my background is dance, because I did a course Dance for Parkinson back in 2015. And it inspired me to write a book on the topic of pharmacy social prescribing. And since writing the book, I had the opportunity to launch the International Social Prescribing Pharmacy Association, and an online course on the Udemy platform, which currently has over 1,300 students from 100 countries. And I'm very excited to look at how we could incorporate AI or agentic AI to social prescribing, but also experiencing quantum. So it become like quantum social prescribing and agentic social prescribing. And we're currently working with different pharmacy organizations across the globe, as well as social prescribing organization. So if anyone in the public health is keen on social prescribing and AI, please reach out. I would love to collaborate. Other than that, I'm quite a passionate dancer. I'm married, I've got a daughter. So one of my, I guess, hidden information is I'm also known as the angel of Indian Crumb, because I brought the dance style to India. And also I was a finalist of a dance TV show in 2017, was able to perform in front of 10,000 people at the Wembley SEC Arena. So you could say I got different hat. And that's me as the summary, I guess. I hope I wasn't talking too much, but it's an honor to be here. Thank you, Dr. Emma.
Thanks so much.
Email, yes, for sure. I will share my email as well. Thank you, Dr. Emma. Thank you.
Please share all your details, in the chat. And you can also send, if anyone doesn't get those, they can always email me, or our clinical AI organizers email, and we'll get you in touch with Aaron. Thank you so much. I loved the dance bit at the end. I know Nick will love that. He'll probably tell you about his dance career. So I will pass swiftly on to Nick for our speaker introduction.
Oh my goodness. I mean, Aaron, you could not have known that there was a more appropriate segue to the next section. But anyway, it gives me a great. So within monthly meetings, we have news. We have our 3-minute intros. Thank you so much to Aaron again. But we also have our thematic sections. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Shubs today. Just briefly, Shubs and I first met at medical school, and at medical school we were part of the musicals society. It was called the Light Opera Society, and so we performed together in the likes of Fame, Anything Goes, Oklahoma. You might be able to see actually that just in the background, Shubs has actually also got a guitar, so hopefully he's going to spontaneously break out into song with us later. Although he won't do, because we're very pleased that he's managed to join us, because he's had the flu recently and he's still got a bit of a cough going. But anyway, Shubs has moved on from the bright lights of the stage at medical school to become a fully qualified GP, and then to join Ada Health and their amazing journey in health tech. And he's also got a key role at a working group at the WHO and in global health, and also runs a highly successful podcast. So Shubs, we're really excited to hear about your journey and your insights for us. And over to you.
Thank you very much. The time of the musicals was a great one, and it was a different life. And sometimes I do try to replicate from the back, but sadly not today. And I'll use the excuse that I've I would just like to say that I apologize in advance if I put myself on mute and have a like mini coughing fit. I've got that kind of lingering cough that you have after the flu. So I'll do my best. But as I said to Nick, it will help me stop rambling and get to the point.
Feel free. It's one of the advantages of a virtual meeting, I suppose.
That's it. Yeah. So I'm hoping you can see my screen. I've got a few slides. And so just to say, I know that there's a lot of clinicians on the call. So what I'm going to be mainly, I guess, speaking to is if you're a clinician, either thinking about or currently working at a health tech company, how do you find out, how do you turn your clinical insights into actual impact, and helping make the right decisions day to day. And if you're not a clinician, I think the way to think about this is if you do or are thinking about including clinicians along in your journey, how to get the most out of them. Yeah, just using some of the insights and the things I've learned and things I've got wrong over the last year, 8 years working at Ada, will hopefully help you guys to have the impact that you want to intend to have. So yeah, let's get into it. Let's press this. Okay. So I wanted to kind of start at the title with like lessons from a long and winding road. And so this image here is kind of just to show you that there's not really necessarily a linear or intentional career progression within, I mean, medicine in general, but within trying to find your way and navigate in health tech as well. As you know, the landscape changes so quickly. And so there's a few things I've learned. But I started out as an NHS GP. I was working as an NHS GP and then became involved with Ada Health, initially as an advisor, and then kind of working my way up to having an impact and getting closely involved in product development. I think the first lesson I wanted to share is first listen. As a clinician, I thought, you know, I'm a GP, I've done my CCT, I can go in there and I will have a receptive audience. I know what the frontline problems are. That's what people brought me in for. And it wasn't always so simple. Whilst the initial value to have been giving was frontline clinical insights, I had seen that we needed to become much more involved and hands-on early in the product development lifecycle. And I tried to kind of skip a few steps and I tried to get right to the leading step. But pushing your way in before you've built relationships, before you've gained trust, and before you've understood how your colleagues in other disciplines see the world and make decisions, means that it doesn't really, what the valuable insights that you might have might not necessarily land in the right way. And so I took a step back to understand. I started to learn about how my colleagues in product, in design, in engineering, and data scientists approach problems, make decisions. And I started to understand their mental models and how they think. And then once I understood this, that was a form, I think being able to listen and create those relationships and gain that trust meant that when I got to the point of saying, hey, this is how we might need to do things, and it landed much better. And so first, I guess like the lesson here is like first listen, right? Understand how things work in your context. And then you kind of earn the right and the trust to shape things. So that's where I was able to then get in there. Timing was important. Ada were leaning into quality and leaning into kind of getting EU regulatory certification. And so that was a really opportune, receptive time to say, hey, we can kind of build the way of doing things together. And so if you think about it as a model of like how you might do things is, people think about process, but you need relationships first. So build the relationships and then you can build processes around that. And so once you've then changed and molded ways of thinking and brought disciplines together, then you kind of earn the right to be able to lead. So I was able to then lead cross-functional groups of engineers, design, product folk, as part of our B2B or health system offering that deployed to US health systems in Europe, health systems in Africa. And And so it's just to say, as your journey goes along, remember that to be able to lead, first you have to listen. It helps your message and your insights land better. The other thing to say is, back in 2016, when I started, just your clinical value was enough to add value. And now, I mean, just the size of this call, the amount of people who are clinicians who are either intending to be or currently already involved in tech is amazing. But it also means you need more than just your clinical experience. So it's really about how you bring your insights and your experience and how you integrate that into the place where you're working. And so how do you stack up your clinical value with the other skills and experience that you have or that you intend to build along the way? And that's a way to then shape what to focus on. Moving on. And just to say as well, over that time, I've moved from London, being an NHS GP, to then moving full-time to Berlin, and then with my family moving to Bordeaux, and that's where I'm talking to you from now. Next lesson, know what game you're in. So what do I mean by this? If you imagine this thing in the kind of middle of the screen here as a spectrum, I see, without trying to be too reductionist, what is your role as a medical person in a health tech company? And ask yourself and the people who are hiring you, honestly, like where along that spectrum are you? From my perspective, if you really want to create impact, the further to the right you are on that spectrum, the doing side, the more impact you can have. There's nothing wrong with being ceremonial. And what I mean by ceremonial here is you're wheeled out as the kind of proof of credibility. Here, we've got a clinician. That means we really understand the clinical workflows and the clinical problems. And that's good that you have someone either on your board or even an advisor, but how much are they doing, or how much are you doing to actually shape everyday decision-making? And so that's an important question to ask if you're a clinician and kind of getting into a health tech company. Like what impact potential do you have? And my argument is the further to right you are, the more impact you can have. The advisor part is not static. You might be more to the left, you might be more to the right. Advisors can still have impact, but it's my feeling that if you're called an advisor, really ask those questions of like, how far does your insight and experience and knowledge of how health systems work translate into actions and decisions that shape the actual quality and of your offering? And so that's, I just kind of wanted to highlight this because sometimes it's not very clear where you are on this. And being able to break down it in the spectrum helped me to then say, okay, well, maybe I started off as an advisor, but as I built trust and as I built relationships, I was able to shift to the right of the spectrum. And so you can think about that either as a clinician, and for the non-clinicians on the call who are thinking about hiring clinicians, think about really where do you want them to be and why. So that's really what I wanted to say here. Know what game you're in. If you are on the right-hand side of that spectrum and trying to create impact, where are the levers? And that depends on the context and how and what the ways of working are at the individual place that you're working. I can give you some insights from how things worked at Ada. It's not necessarily enough to download your experience of how a health system works, or how a patient journey works, or how a clinical workflow works. It's about also thinking about what are the right opportune moments, the lever points, that this actually translates into action. For Ada, one of the places we had that was really identified as like there's like massive ROI to like really focus efforts here was the point in time where we were cross-functionally trying to understand and articulate the problems that users were having or health system clients were having. And that was because they had the right people in the room. So the right colleagues are in the room. So your design colleagues, your solution architects, your product folk, your client-facing teams, your engineers and developers, the quality assurance team, they're all there and receptive and asking those questions. And that's the opportunity for you to just have the assumption that the first problem statement that comes in is raw, unfiltered, and imprecise. The way I like to think about it, so we might have a few GPs on the call. In general practice, we talk about when the patient comes in, how do you ask the right questions to get to the nub of the problem? The patient has a separate agenda to you. How do you ask the right questions to, like, so what's the reason for this ask? Or what's the ask behind the ask? We also want to find out, for example, with the patient, what is the context around them? Well, like what's shaping this problem that they've come to us with? And so I think the same principles apply if you're coming to a problem that your clients or your health systems have come to you with. And it's your job as a clinician to really help bridge that and turn maybe kind of a raw, unfiltered problem area into very, very precise understanding of like the problems and the context around it. And so that's a really important thing. The other, and that helps you to supercharge discovery, patient journey mapping, user stories, and really translate your knowledge of how how things are on the front line to actually like creating a good product. The other level point is conversations around risk and understanding risk. This is often a requirement from a regulatory perspective and built into how a company might approach like the development process. And it's really important that you as a clinician are involved in that risk conversation and shedding light on not just what could go wrong from a technical perspective, but how that might translate into clinical harm. And then it's not just about identifying the risks, but be part of solving and mitigating those risks. And so we used to have this kind of hashtag at Ada, like, don't hate, mitigate. And so like be involved in the mitigation process. And as part of that also, be the one who, or be the entity that helps define the intended value and what good looks like. Like you can really help shape that. And that's a way to create impact as well. And the final message here is you are not representative of all clinicians. And it's really important that you remind your colleagues of this in other disciplines. Sometimes your insights or your sign-off, especially if you're a clinical safety officer or something like that, is kind of like seen as like a stamp of approval. And so you can imagine a conversation down the line when a deployment has gone, hey, we got this like clinical sign-off from Shubs. Like, why are like clinicians in health system X not loving this, right? And so it's just to remember that also your insights and the things that you feed in are assumptions like any other. And that's part of the, I guess, in product development, you talk about build, measure, iterate, and your assumptions might be wrong. And so how do you make sure in your process, you've built in how that's challenged and how that will improve? I wanted to highlight a bit of a story on this one. We at Ada, so back in 2020, had our flagship first health system client, a huge health system in the US. We were like 2 weeks from deployment, and they were like, Shubs, can you kind of just like at the end of the process, can you just like test this with some clinical scenarios and make sure it's good to go? We're 2 weeks from shipping, just like, can you just help us like get this through, test some clinical scenarios? And we did that, except it wasn't that simple. There were a whole load of issues that we picked up in testing, and got a lot of pushback on like trying to fix those things, which is normal because there is needed a balance of speed and getting things done, but also like what's good enough, and that's always a trade-off to balance, right? And so we managed to deploy, we managed to iron out a few of these issues. I remember being in that first meeting with their clinical leader. So we had a bunch of our technical folks, our product folks, and some of us clinicians who were in that call. And they had a list this long of issues that had come out. A lot, some of them were things that we'd found as well, and said that we'd kind of try and fix as we go. And some of them were other things that they had picked up that we hadn't. And so, of course, we talked to them about that. We were able to push back on some of the things, but there were some things that we were like, yeah, absolutely. Like, we need to get to the root of the problems around this, and we're not going to kind of do quick fixes on this. So like, we'll go deep and fix this. And as this was kind of, as this was kind of transpiring, I was like, I need to sit down with the director of engineering here. We need to like build this whole process. If we're going to do this successfully over time, we need to like rebuild this whole process. We cannot just have people testing at the end. So we kind of thought out what it would look like to have clinicians working with quality engineers right at the beginning of that risk process, how we mitigate, how then we focus our testing on what matters, and then how we then deploy and then proactively monitor and improve, and not just wait for feedback. And so we were able to build a business case for clinicians who had the technical kind of know-how and competence to kind of deliver on this and hire that team and kind of then execute on that, and then build the process and the documentation and all of that was needed. And we were able to kind of translate that into an actually working, functioning feedback loop after deploying as well. And just if you fast forward like 2 or 3 years, when it came to the retention conversation with that client, that was cited as like one of the reasons. And they talked about the fact that when they were in those feedback conversations with us, they felt heard. They knew those things were going to be action. It was great to have that clinician in the room and that clinical conversation. And that was one of the big reasons they felt they could trust us. And that clinical leader who initially criticized us, we were able to use the relationship that we'd created with them and the trust to then be able to kind of keep that client for another 4 years. And so the lesson here is sometimes to kind of make bigger changes, you have to create a lot with very little resources, and gain that trust, not just with your peers internally, but then with the people that you're working with and trying to serve. And that trust goes a long way. And as a clinician, and the people you work with, you can be the one that raises like the bar of quality within where you're working. So I think that's really important. Let's go next. So some final thoughts on creating impact. Impact is not this kind of broad nebulous concept. You can get really specific with it. So think about impact to whom, to what. You can think about impact within your team. How are you creating impact with people around you? To the quality of your product, to the patients that you're serving, to other clinicians who might be using your product and having to interact with it. Impact to your company or to a health system, impact to the industry, impact to underserved communities who are like often, an afterthought. The other thing is impact is not, and value is not just about efficiency and cost savings, where at the moment, of course, in this current macroeconomic climate, like that is king right now. As a clinician, you can shine a light on other things that are valuable. Patients having a great experience, like actual clinical outcomes, the well-being of clinicians, health equity, population health. So how can you translate the value of that into the business objectives within your company? Be the champion for building things right. Everyone's trying to do the right thing, but how do you do the thing right? And so that's where safety, quality, ethics comes in. Why should it not be you that bangs the drum on this? And so, you can only do that if you're on the right-hand side of that spectrum, I feel. If you're more on the ceremonial end of the spectrum, then it's really just about thought leadership. Whereas what's more impactful is like actually if you can lead action and change. The other thing is that the industry talks a lot about product market fit, and product market fit is not a static concept, it is changing. And so you have to be receptive of that as a company, to how value is shifting, or the perception of value is shifting within the industry. And I think you can adapt that to yourself as well, or think about that with your own career. The value of you as a clinician, the value that you have to offer, will shift over time. And so how are you adapting? How are you stacking up your skill set and experience? And so PMF yourself. So think about product market fit and how that shifts, and what you need to do to add on to your stack of skills, experience, and things you have, and value that you have to offer to the industry, to be able to then kind of stay impactful in what will hopefully be a useful career. I will stop there. Thank you. Just to say, so I do this podcast that Nick mentioned. It's called the Global Perspectives on Digital Health podcast. I did this because, especially the work I did with the I2WHO, there's lots of examples of implementation and good implementation from underserved communities, and in particular low and middle income country settings. And I think that we in the so-called West can learn from a lot of those things. And so that's why I started that podcast, to shine a light on those. And I've also recently started a Shubs stack, just kind of downloading a few of my thoughts and things that I've learned over time as well, around the challenges of being a clinician or trying to create impact within digital health. And yeah, if you want to reach out to me, I'm on LinkedIn as Shubs Upadhyay. Thank you for listening. I hope this was useful.
Thank you so much, Shubs. Round of applause. Obviously, you just can't see them at the moment. Thank you so much for taking us down your long and winding road. There are certainly questions lined up, and if anyone does want to put their hand up and ask it in kind of virtually in person, then they're more than welcome to as well. But Shubs, just one thing that kind of struck me was that moment that you described, where you kind of had that light bulb and you said, oh, do you know what, I need to get into the same room as the director of engineering, and we need to go through this process together as clinician and engineer, working out a response to this problem. I mean, I've got experience not in industry but in research of collaborating, with colleagues in the School of Electronics and Computer Science, for example. Have you got any tips for, how to approach those interactions? Because I know that when I first started, it does feel as if you're almost talking a different language.
I don't think there are necessarily any tips. The main thing is to ask questions. Engineers love asking questions as well. And so if you can create that space to show that you're taking the time to understand, how do you approach that? How do you think about, I want to understand. So if I use the example of the conversations we had on risk, I took some time to observe how we used to have these ceremonies called risk storming, where quality engineers, software engineers, product folk would talk about, look at a user journey and think about all the technical risks as you're trying to then map out the solution. And I observed several of these, and I was like, this is super useful. Tell me more about this. Like, why does, what does this technical term mean? How do you think about this? What does this not mean? Why do you call this that and not that? And so being curious and taking the time to understand, that definitely helps when you then feel that, hey, there's an opportunity to add some clinical aspects here. And so into that process, not only were we able to get clinicians within that process, but we were able to add in specific quality aspects that were related to medicine within that were actually somehow separate but added value to that conversation. And our colleagues absolutely loved that. They were like, wow, we realized that this was a complete blind spot. This is great to have in that. So I don't know if it's not necessarily a hack or anything, but it's just, taking the time to ask questions and understand goes a long way.
Absolutely. And also, I guess, that goes with that, I suppose approaching with humility as well, recognizing your own limitations within this area, and expertise of others that are in the room. We've got a question from Imo that relates to the tension between clinical rigor and the desires of enterprise. So where are we? In terms of the game being played, how do we handle tensions between the aims of healthcare for care provision and increasing equity, which should be translated to the uses of medical tech and AI, and the desires for health tech to remain in business with profit maximization and cost minimization?
Yeah, I mean, this is like really the thing. I can share it, but I recently wrote something about this, like one of the last kind of things that we wrote, that I wrote when I was at Ada. I like to use the metaphor of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. So as a company, if you think about company as like the subject here, a company might want to be intrinsically motivated to address some of these things. Because, and so how do you, and in some ways, the way we did this at Ada was like, this gives us a competitive moat. Like, these are important criteria from a procurement perspective, from a regulatory perspective, like to lean into this stuff. So equity and ethical approaches became pillars of quality. So it was part of building a decent product. And so we were able to kind of, in the times where it worked, weld it into, hey, these are the things we need to prioritize, because they will help us, win contract. We're able to kind of attach it to business objectives. And also, I think the other thing is, sometimes if you think only from a sales perspective, like, oh, we need to like do everything we can to get this deal over the line, we have to remember, you have to actually deliver that. And so you talk about in the industry the concept of churn, right? And so if you invest in this stuff, you reduce churn. You actually keep clients because they trust you. You're helping them reach the broader health system goals, rather than just being like an incremental thing that saves them money for a year and gives them 2 times ROI in a year on this like incremental thing. If you can change the conversation with them to, we can help you with that, but we want to hear about your bigger transformational goals. Like, what are you trying to do in terms of improving access, and what are your goals for like improving health inequalities, and how can we help you do that with, you know, the offering that we have, or the things that we can prioritize that are on our roadmap. And so that's the intrinsic motivation part. And then there's the extrinsic motivation part, and this is where procurement needs to come in. This is where health systems have to help win. So if you think, I like to kind of use the metaphor of like, it's like we're in this explosion of like AI and tech, and everyone's got like feeding off vibes and like, oh, what's the next thing? But actually, like, for what? To what end? And it's health systems and government and decision makers who need, if you want the companies to survive who actually lean into this stuff, how do you make sure that they win? How do you make them win the contracts? How do you make them retain contracts? How do you put that into your RFPs and procurement process, so that the ones who are actually not just talking about it but living it will survive? So yeah, a couple of thoughts there: intrinsic and extrinsic motivation.
Love it, absolutely love it. We've got a question from Miles as well. Miles says, hi Shubs, I was wondering which specific relationships you build and who you would suggest building relationships with before when early in a health tech career. So how do you go about building your network?
Just to clarify, do you mean before you've got into a company and you're trying to understand, or when you are in one?
I suspect that Miles is interested in, I mean, you know, a lot of people on this call will be looking at you, Shubs, as someone, you know, who's made that transition into health tech. And, you know, it doesn't take much for me with my medical students in Southampton to talk to them, and they're all really excited about, you know, that as a possibility further down the line. So how, you know, you've talked a bit about your long and winding road, but how did you go about like making that first step to becoming let's say an advisor? That was it a kind of complete chance meeting, or were you quite strategic about the way you built your relationships towards that?
So in my case, it was completely being in the right place at the right time. I'd done some work on trying to build something myself, which gave me enough credibility to get in the door. I think the threshold is way higher now, right, than it was. So of course, that's a very legitimate question. And Miles, I saw your message that before getting into a company. I don't think there's one answer that fits everyone. You have to think about where your interests lie. There are like what mode do you want to play, right? There's lots of people I know who leaned into design thinking and stacked up their skill on kind of like the design direction. There's other people who have like, hey, like I can code, I get data science, that's going to be my thing where I bring the domains together. For others, they've managed to bridge being a product manager and a clinician, and that's like, really valuable as well. And so I guess it's where does your interest and current skill set lie, and where might you want to go, and then I guess you can target the types of people then you're trying to reach out to through that. So other professionals who are working in there are a lot of other clinicians who might be wanting to have a similar journey, and finding them. There's lots of courses, but in terms of relationships, reaching out to people who are already professionals within this to understand how they think. LinkedIn's, as much as we kind of bash LinkedIn, it's a great place to meet people in other domains and have conversations with them.
Yes, as you were answering there, it did make me think that, I don't know, I wonder whether there's some kind of mentoring. Are you aware of mentoring within health tech? So, I mean, obviously that will happen on a more informal basis. But are there any formal organizations doing it? And if not, I just wonder whether that would be something that people might be interested in.
I definitely think that mentoring happens in companies. I was mentored for a while by product leaders, by a leader in quality engineering, to understand, be mentored by your peers, right? So it's much easier, like if you're in and working with people, to be mentored. Outside of that, I'm not aware of a specific mentoring organization, but there are organizations, exactly like Mar said, like Byte Labs and others, where you then get people who either have bridged and are clinicians, or you've got people who really have that vertical skill set, and are able to translate that to someone who might be looking to kind of be a clinician, kind of trying to get in there. So those are good examples of ways to try. But outside, I don't think, aside from what's been mentioned, I don't think there are any kind of necessarily formal, I don't know. So for example, if you wanted to be a product manager, there's not a formal product manager thing, right? For clinicians who want to get into product management, or clinicians who want to understand engineering, or there might be for coding. I think it might be for like clinical coders, or physicians who are clinicians who want to be engineers or code or do stuff with AI. And so if you don't have something formal, and like I did, if something doesn't exist, take the first step and just create something. Reach out to a professional within that space who's an expert, have conversations with them, and see if they'd be open to mentoring you to open your understanding.
I think that's a great idea. And actually, thank you to Miles for highlighting Byte Labs. Shout out to them. They do a load of really great work in that space. So do engage with them. We've also got a question from Eman, and this really gives a kind of medical student perspective. And so for example, you talked about product, the advantage of maybe being a clinician and having product management expertise, but how do you go about doing that? So So Emmanuel says, you mentioned how it's not enough to just be a clinician nowadays. As a medical student going into this changing landscape, what types of skills and experience should I focus on gaining? For example, should I learn to code if I want to be more towards the doing side of the scale?
I would say don't do coding just to give yourself a competitive advantage. I would say that, I mean, I would also say don't use this as a playbook. You might have your own journey as well. But in my opinion, be led by like what interests you. So don't do coding if that's not where your interest lies. And so I think it's just about, there's lots of ways to be involved in the doing. Be led by what your interest is and what you can do now, what you have access to now, because you can always build on that. And there's like a compounding effect. I mean, if you're starting as a med student, I feel like there's a compounding effect over time that, you know, whatever you're learning, you can go for breadth as well. People talk a lot about specializing and going vertical, and that's great and that's important. I think there's also value to being a generalist and being someone who's what they call T-shaped, where you have your kind of vertical skill set, which was once being the clinician, and then the other horizontal bits of the T being the other domains that you can then connect. Like that's a skill in itself. It's like talking about, you know, general practice is a specialty in itself because you're able to kind of bring those things together. And so that's where my interest lied. And so that's where I got the opportunity to add impact. There are many different journeys people can have, and some people become founders and go down that journey. Some people, you know, are able to say, hey, like I will build it, and great, do that. And so I don't know if that answers the question, but be led by your interest rather than just trying to. As clinicians, we're very good, especially in med school, of like saying, what course do I need to do to be competitive? And just like you can take a step back and say, there's loads of stuff out there. Like, be led by your interest. The course also doesn't mean that gives you the interest. And so it might give you opportunities and increase your surface area of opportunities to be able to then get in the door somewhere. So I don't know if that's like it's not a clean, satisfying answer, but there isn't one, I feel.
Emmanuel seems very grateful for your answer, as we all are. Joe, over to you.
Oh yeah, thanks Nick, and thanks Shubs, fantastic talk. I had a question. So it seems that there are almost two options. There's the one option which is kind of stay in healthcare, and then there's the other option which is jump in the deep end with both feet. And for every one person there is who wants to take that plunge, there's probably 10 more who are wanting to dip a toe in, but still really enjoy their clinical role and want to maintain that connection to patients. Maybe they're looking for a part-time role, maybe it's a bit more than part-time, but nonetheless they want to retain that kind of that clinical aspect to their work. I wonder what your thoughts were on the pros and cons of the deep end leap versus the more cautious approach.
We need our clinicians to stay in medicine as well. I've obviously left and gone to the dark side, but also I definitely think it's possible to do. I mean, when I started with Ada, I was doing part-time clinical work and part-time working with Ada, and so it's definitely possible to find those roles. There's a few guys out there who are also able to create opportunities for clinicians in certain relevant spaces to be able to give input to health tech companies. So I think Derek Core, who set up a company to be able to do this as well. So that's a way to dip in as well and join a community that does that, where you then able to add value within the context of your clinical work, right? Also, sometimes companies are they don't necessarily looking for someone full-time. They might have clinicians they have on their bank of people that they reach out to for feedback, for iteration, for understanding problem areas, for understanding healthcare contexts. And so there are definitely ways to be involved in that way. And even leaders now, I mean, there are fractional roles as well. So, you know, if you ever wanted to be a founder or a chief medical officer one day, they happen as a fractional role, so like a part-time role. And part of that is because they want the person to be practicing. Part of it is the ceremonial aspect of it. But also it's giving those, being connected. You know, they say in tech, you know, people who are leading and building need to be as close to the problems as possible. And so as a clinician, you are, especially if you're still practicing, you're, you know, right there, you're like living those problems. And so how can you translate that? So I definitely think it's possible.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe. Anna, you're up next.
Hi, hello. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yes, great, great. So yes, hi, Shubs. Absolutely great talk. So a bit of background, I'm a GP registrar, and hence, hopefully at some point going to qualify as a fully fledged GP, and hence this is why of one of the topics that's of interest to me. I think some of the aspects of has been already touched from other people's questions, but my main question was just thinking about what makes it, what do you find rewarding in tech, and what keeps you in there versus going back to your patients, you know, your usual sort of clinical work, and what has been your most interesting challenge so far? And sorry, just a few bunched in. What did you find the most difficult from your transition from the initial so NHS work and sort of putting your foot in the door and getting to where you are now?
Yeah, a few questions there. So if I'll answer the last one first. Let's just go through them again, actually. So one was like, what kind of was the biggest challenge I had in the transition from being practicing as a GP to working in tech. So I'll tackle that one first. I think the biggest challenge was you have this bias to action. You're like, you see the problems and you're like, oh man, can you just concentrate on this stuff? I know you want to do this stuff, but we need to concentrate on this stuff. And I think the biggest challenge was that journey to realization of okay, how do I change people's minds? How do I learn how people think? How do I learn how this, and by the way, there's not one way everyone will think. Ada has had its own culture. So I had to learn Ada's own culture. And that changed over time as Ada went from being a startup, and everything was the conversation was with the guy next to you, right? To a scale up where everything becomes more formal. There's way more layers, way more silos. Suddenly the whole different parts of the organization are going on in different directions. You know, oh my god, the centers of gravity is 3 different centers of gravity. How you bring it together? And so I think the big thing was learning how organizational culture also how you can impact that, and how do you change the way things are done. The other thing is I really miss clinical work. I was kind of forced to a little bit, because when I moved to Berlin and was working with a team there, I was coming back and forth and still doing clinical work, coming back to London. And then COVID happened and I couldn't. So I got further and further away from clinical work. And so that became really difficult. And then I kind of had to make the decision to kind of fall off the performers list. And anyway, we ended up moving to Bordeaux. And so I do miss clinical work. I now feel I don't add that same value as before of the frontline clinical insights. And so if I ever wanted to take a role that was doing that, I wouldn't be able to, because I would then say, okay, well, I need to I've now built up a different skill set. And then I would need to work with people who are on the front line to be able to get those insights. And so how do you change that? Your clinical work becomes such a big part of who you are and your self, the values you see in the world. And so that was a big change that was part of the transition as well. I think I got most of your questions there.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's very, thanks for your honesty.
Yeah.
And like I can tell, it's not easy. It's just a decision, right? What values, what you hold value to yourself, and I
Yeah.
suppose so. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. And Ayub, last question.
Yes, thanks, Shubs, and thanks, Nick. Just a quick question on translation from what we're doing here to the larger markets such as the US, where it's a different healthcare system. How do you implement that knowledge? Because I'm working in the health tech space myself as well, and I get often asked by investors or other institutions, hey, could you give us some insights how we can actually get this put in practice in the US, because it's a different regulatory environment and practice as well. Any experience there?
Yeah, I mean, we deployed to the US, and so this was a big challenge in understanding. I mean, the clinicians who were in ADA, we were very, very cognizant that we needed to work with clinicians who were in the US, and kind of that point that I'd made of like our insights working as clinicians in Europe or in the UK didn't translate to completely understanding. The value system is different. The way it's healthcare is funded, the different ways or the types of organization and what they value is like very, very different to UK. And so whilst some of the I guess efferent impacts are kind of similar sometimes, each of our systems have got there in different ways with different motivations. And so I think it's really important when you're thinking about a system like the US to just remember that you need to really work with clinicians and people who understand that context. And so you might have some general understanding, and you might have some empathy and understanding of how things work for clinicians. Just remember that we don't really know how. And so you need to make sure that you invest in understanding with people who are on the ground there.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Shubs. Round of applause.
Thank you.
And I'm only incredibly sad that we haven't had an opportunity to hear you play the guitar, but we'll save that for next time. So thank you again, Shubs, for joining us. And I'll hand over now to Joe to close.
Yeah, thanks again, Shubs, and also to Aaron for your 3-minute introduction earlier on the meeting. I guess all that's left to say as we come into land is that we've got some upcoming meetings throughout the month of March. Emma's just popped some links in the chat. So on the 4th of March, we've got our next AI for Women's Health meeting. And then on the 11th of March, we have the next AI for Public Health meeting. That's that debate that Nick was talking about. So I think that's definitely one not to miss. And then on the 25th of March at midday, we have this meeting again, but just next month, so 6 weeks' time. And we're really fortunate to have the Director of Innovation and Improvement at the Health Foundation, Malte Gerholt, joining us to talk about the government's new AI Opportunities Action Plan and what that might mean for the NHS. So hope to see you all there. Thanks again for joining us this afternoon, and hope you have a great rest of your day.